Hello, listeners. It's Gunter Swoboda here with some exciting news. We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspire Change with Gunter. If your organisation cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self development, and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspire Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number one in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts to listen and follow in 2024. With an average of 50,000 downloads per episode each week from listeners all around the world, our reach is significant and growing. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to mirandaspigener-sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter, and yes, I'm back, well on the way to recovery. And so before I dive into today's podcast, which is a little bit unusual compared to some of the other stuff that I've done, is I firstly want to thank mirandaspigener-sapon for stepping in as a guest host on Inspired Change while I was on sick leave. Your insightful conversation with Andrew Flores on inspiring change and positive masculinity was genuinely impactful. I really enjoyed it. In addition, I want to congratulate Miranda on her documentary short, What It Means, which won Best Documentary at Film Festival. And what's more, I want to extend a special thanks to Gilles Marini for his continued support of the podcast and the Changemakers Collective. Your contributions mean so much to us. So thank you all for keeping the spirit of the show alive. Now, today's podcast. As I said, I'm going to do something a little different. Whilst I was sick, I had plenty of time to think, especially on the way on my recovery journey. And it just so happened that, I was cruising around YouTube and looking at different YouTubes or different lectures on psychology, sociology, and I happened to run across a YouTube video on the Buddhist creation myth. Now, to put this into context, in my mid to late teens, I got very interested in Buddhism and I did a lot of study in it. And obviously, at the time, I also read the Aganya Sutta, and that fundamentally is the Buddhist creation myth. And I haven't read it or looked at it for many, many years, decades, in fact. So as I was watching this video on YouTube, aside from it resonating with me much, much more than the monotheistic religions and their creation mythologies, I started to click to points of connection with making good men great. So what I want to do is I want to give you a bit of a sort of overview of the Aganya Sutta, and especially given that it is so different from general creation myths. In this particular instance, this myth just doesn't create, trace the physical genesis of the universe, but it also provides a philosophical narrative that aligns strikingly with the concepts of decline, materialism, and the progressive forgetting of one's innate wisdom and interconnectedness. By contextualizing this myth within the Making Good Men Great framework, I feel that we can gain a deeper insights into Buddhist thought and how it actually, in many respects, critiques patriarchal structures and points towards a path of spiritual and ethical and psychological evolution. So, let me give you a bit of a summary of the Buddhist creation myth, the Aganya Sutta. The Aganya Sutta presents a cyclical view of the universe in which creation and dissolution are endless. According to this myth, the world goes through cycles of evolution and devolution. In the beginning, sentient beings existed as radiant, ethereal forms who nourished themselves on joy and the essence of the earth. Now, over time, these beings experienced desires that led them to partake in more material sustenance. As their desires increased, their luminous forms diminished, and they began to take on physical bodies, becoming more grounded in material existence. So, hang on a minute, most of you say, what's that got to do with making good men great? Well, bear with me, and I want you to pay particularly good critical attention to what I'm saying. Now, as these beings developed attachments to physical forms and material possessions, they began to differentiate themselves, leading to a sense of identity, social stratification, and the emergence of concepts like territory, property, and hierarchy. Okay, so you can see we're getting a little closer to my framework of making good men great. Now, this gradual descent from a state of oneness to fragmentation culminates in the establishment of social roles and institutions, including the eventual rise of the monarchy and the division of labour. So let's take that next step then. How do we contextualize the Buddhist creation myth within the Making Good Men Great framework? So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the 5 sort of core values of patriarchy and I'm going to contrast them between the mythic context and the Making Good Men Great analysis. So I always saw Making Good Men Great as a framework that offers an analytical lens through which we can understand both human individual behavior, but also human social behavior. Um, and I think that is particularly important. We're at a crossroads, in my view, in whether we either make it or break it. In fact, I believe, according to the myth, that we are in a state of devolution. So I want to explore the myth's relevance to modern masculinity, patriarchy, and the transformative journey towards creating great men. So, central to making good men great is the reimagining of masculinity, the development of a curriculum for change, and the formation of supportive networks for men that ultimately expand into including human beings as a whole. Now, by examining the myth through the lens of the 5 patriarchal characteristics, i.e., territory, hierarchy, acquisition, competition, and combativeness, I want to demonstrate how these elements manifest and how Buddhism's critique of them aligns with making good men's goals, making good men great's goals. Okay, so first one, territory. So the mythic context of this is that in the creation myth, beings start off as free and unbound, sharing everything equally. However, as desires increase, they begin to mark off portions of land as their own, leading to disputes and the establishment of territory. So, in the Making Good Men Great analysis, what we see is that the Buddhist myth reveals how attachment to land and the subsequent development of territoriality leads to division, conflict, and suffering. This is one of the fundamental, sources of suffering: attachment to property and territory and material things. In the Making Good Men Great framework, reimagining masculinity involves letting go of this attachment to territorial dominance and understanding that one's worth is not defined by possession or control of physical spaces. The myth's original state of being reflects an ideal of non attachment and shared existence, which Making Good Men Great can claim to emulate by encouraging men to see their identity and value as beyond ownership or control. I.e., let me give you an example. When I am in a relationship, I do not own my partner. They are an independent being that chooses to be in a relationship, that chooses to be connected to me so that we elevate ourselves. All right, let's go on to the next one, hierarchy. So the mythic context of this is that as beings became more physically defined, differences in appearance, ability, and possessions lead to comparisons. These comparisons gave rise to the notions of superiority and inferiority, which eventually formalized into social hierarchies. I want you to think about teenage peer groups, the Kardashians, all that sort of stuff. Now, in the Making Good Men Great analysis, we see that the myth suggests that hierarchy is a product of human ignorance and desire, and that it's not an inherent or natural order. The Making Good Men Great framework challenges this by advocating for egalitarian relationships where men redefine their sense of self beyond competitive ranking. In the Buddhist myth, hierarchy represents a fall from the original state of equality, reminding us that the pursuit of status is antithetical to true self awareness and growth. Next, acquisition. The mythic context of this is that the craving for material sustenance began the process of beings taking more than what they need, leading to hoarding and competition. Now, interestingly enough, we can see that in myths like the myth of the dragon sitting on a gold hoard. This marked a shift from spiritual nourishment to material acquisition. Now, the perspective of Making Good Men Great is that the Buddhist myth portrays acquisition as a deviation from one's true enlightened state. In Making Good Men Great, men are encouraged to critically examine their attachments to material possessions and redefine success in terms of inner fulfillment rather than external accumulation. The myth's progression shows that the acquisition leads to a sense of lack and isolation, reinforcing the Making Good Men Great principle that true greatness arises from abundance within, not from external wealth. Competition. Now, in the mythic context, we can see that as beings began to desire more, they began to compete for resources, land, and status. This competition bred conflict, leading to further suffering and estrangement from their original harmonious state. Now, the Making Good Men Great analysis takes us further into seeing that the competitive drive is identified as one of the core characteristics of patriarchal conditioning. Making Good Men Great advocates for shifting away from zero-sum thinking towards a more cooperative and collaborative model of masculinity and culture. The Buddhist myth serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating how competition fosters division and leads to the erosion of communal bonds. By embracing principles of mutual improvement, Making Good Men Great seeks to guide men away from the pitfalls of competition. As human beings, we are stronger when we work together. We can overcome huge odds when we do that. So now let's talk about the final one, which is about being combative. In the mythic context, we can see that as beings became more engrossed in their physical forms and possessions, they grew combative, defending their territories, resources, and identities. Violence and aggression emerged as a means of asserting dominance. Now, let me give you the Making Good Men Great analysis here. Combativeness is often glorified in traditional masculinity, but it is critiqued within both the Buddhist myth and the Making Good Men Great framework as a destructive force. The myth illustrates that this combative nature is a deviation from one's true self, and overcoming it is essential for personal and collective liberation. Making Good Men Great aligns with this by advocating for non-violence, for empathy, and for understanding as the foundations for building supportive networks amongst men and communities. So let me tie this together. So if I look at this, it deeply resonates for me. I'm a little bit surprised how closely my emergent model was to what I read as a young man. Whether that was bubbling around in my subconscious and this is how I expressed it, I can't answer that really, in all honesty, other than to me, it is one of those self evident truths that attracted me to Buddhism in the first place and through which I've tried to lead my life. Fundamentally, the Buddhist creation myth serves as an allegory for how attachment, desire, and ignorance lead to the construction of the patriarchal system. The myth's initial state of being, marked by equality, non-attachment, and radiant wisdom, reflects the very qualities that the Making Good Men Great framework seeks to cultivate in men today. It challenges the notion that patriarchal characteristics are natural. They're in fact a deviation. It also challenges the idea that they are unchangeable, but rather suggests that they are acquired habits rooted in ignorance and fear. So, how can we integrate the myth into Making Good Men Great's curriculum? Well, in many respects, the myth is a great teaching tool, and it's valuable for that in of itself. And it highlights certain points in the Making Good Men Great curriculum in several ways. The first one being self-reflection. Men can explore how their own desires for acquisition, competition, and hierarchy might mirror the being's descent in the myth, fostering a deeper understanding of how these tendencies lead to suffering. It is also a springboard for spiritual awakening. The myth emphasizes the potential to return to a state of enlightenment, suggesting that men can transcend patriarchal conditioning by rediscovering their inherent wisdom and interconnectedness, our own true nature. And especially at this point in our history, this is about community building. The early stages of the myth were characterized by shared joy and sustenance, and it provided a model for the type of supportive, non-competitive networks Making Good Men Great aims to build amongst men. Now, a lot of you are going to sort of look at this and listen to this and go, yeah, that's all very well, but it's pie in the sky. But is it? Surely, if we try to approximate to it as closely as we possibly are able to, then we are still going to make a difference. We are never going to enter a state of utopia or nirvana. That's not what I'm suggesting. So, in conclusion, let me put it this way. The Buddhist creation myth and the Making Good Men Great framework both point toward a transformative journey of self-discovery, one that requires moving beyond the limiting structures of patriarchy. The myth serves as a mirror, reflecting how the characteristics of territory, hierarchy, acquisition, competition, and combativeness are born from ignorance and attachment to the material. By engaging with this myth, the Making Good Men Great framework can guide us men to strip away these layers, to reclaim their innate goodness, and to step into a form of masculinity that is grounded in wisdom, compassion, and a shared humanity. As I said, folks, in the beginning, it's a little different. Okay, now I'm not advocating Buddhism as a religion. Buddhism is not a religion, it is a philosophy. And as a philosophy, I believe that it brings a great deal to the table. From my perspective, much, much more than the prescriptive, dogmatic, monotheistic religions. It is a mature way of thinking and being in a world wherein there is suffering. And our job is to begin to alleviate the suffering. So, folks, if this has inspired you to change, please pick up and take it with you. All it takes is you to act in a way that fits this. Don't try to persuade others. Just be the person that you would like to be. Self-aware, awaken, part of a connected community. And then allow each of us to take that mission forward. So until next time, this is me signing off. I hope you enjoyed it. If nothing else, please think about this deeply. This is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.